November 10th of 2022. Time now is 6:01. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So as we move into the consideration of the agenda, just for context for everybody, this meeting arose because we were trying to find some time to begin going through the zoning ordinance recommended changes. And we were having challenges finding time, so we ended up settling on this particular Thursday, if I remember right. Really, the agenda tonight is very simple. It's really just going over, discussing the process and potentially going over some particular sections as recommended by Sarah as a recommended order. We'd also have a couple of reports, although those are going to be quick because 2 of the 3 aren't here. So with that, is there any questions on the agenda this evening? Hearing none, could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving on. With the agenda topics of this evening, is there anybody on this commission that feels they have a conflict of interest regarding the subject matter this evening? Not hearing any. Okay, that's good. So we can move ahead with the approval of the meeting minutes of September 13th of 2022. Are there any suggestions or recommended changes to the minutes? Laura, is your name spelled correctly? This
It
time
must have been because I didn't notice it.
Okay. I thought the minutes seemed fine to me. I didn't see any issues, but I'm curious if anybody else saw anything.
I agree.
In fact, I would comment that they were well done and they're concise but yet complete. So
Motion moved as presented.
There's, I'm sorry, the very last, the very last page, item C, next meeting scheduled for October 11.
Oh, I did highlight that, but I thought October 11th was right. I just checked, but it's the wrong year, isn't it?
There's something wrong with it, yeah.
so that wasn't true at the time. Did we think it was going to be scheduled for that date?
Yeah, that was that was the regular meeting date, but we did briefly talk about not having it because people weren't going to be here. We didn't take any action to reschedule anything at that time.
Okay, so
But it was 2022.
Yeah.
oh,
I think that's what led to the conversation about having this special study session instead of the meeting. So the meeting should probably be modified to reflect that.
I think that's a good recommended change.
Yeah, because it talks about regular meeting may be rescheduled for zoning ordinance study group meeting. It's the last sentence, so.
Yeah, I did not pick up on that year at all. So I think it does capture the fact that we discussed it then, now that I see it. What Sarah just pointed out. Regular meeting may be rescheduled due to zoning ordinance study group meeting. Okay. So I think other than the 23 to 22, any other changes? So could we have a motion?
So moved as presented with the correction.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Thank you. So now we move into public comment on the agenda items for today. So I'd like any members of the audience to please fill out the comment cards and submit them, I guess, to Laura. And please keep your comments to 3 minutes. And please address the comments towards me. And please no clapping or cheering. It's not a huge audience tonight. I won't expect too much of that, but you never know. So with that, is there anybody that would like to make comments this evening?
We've got two. We've got Lee, if you want to come up first.
He's coming.
He's coming to help you there.
Oh, it's on. Okay. My name is Lee Scott. I live at 347 Northwest Torch Lake Drive. And I was a member of the steering committee that prepared the draft ordinance for your review. And I sent a letter that I hope got distributed uh, regarding my concerns about a couple of sections in the ordinance. As I mentioned in my letter, our purpose was not to add and delete things to the ordinance. It was just to put it in a proper order and format for you to consider. As Laura knows, I was very vocal about not having two sections in that ordinance. One was for wind turbines, the other was for solar energy farms. Based on my experience in another state, I have seen what happens when these types of installations are put in. And our entire township is part of two watersheds, either the Bay or Torch Lake. And to remove the amount of timber or vegetation that is required to put these types of installations in, it would be rather disastrous. And as I said in my letter, I would just hope that you folks would see fit to remove those two sections from the supplemental uses section. And the only other thing I have to say is that there are some of us in the audience who are hard of hearing. And if you could make sure your microphones are on and you speak into the microphones, that would help those folks, especially me. Thank you.
I thank you.
All right, Jerry, you're next up.
Good to see everybody here. It's still fun to be on this side. The other side is pretty good also. Good people. Can you hear me okay in this? Okay. Jerry Kolka, 2341 San Marino Trail, Keewaydin, Michigan. I am assuming that the people up front have received the handout that I wrote. Okay, good. If anyone also needs additional copies or did not receive one, we will have additional copies put on the table and back. Due to the 3-minute limitation, definitely I'm not going to go through that long page. And so I'm going to give you just a quick summary of what's going on and hope everybody can hear me well. Okay, good. Definitely see the handout for more details. Topic 1 on the handout, Planning Commission commissioners being on the steering committee. Planning Commission commissioners should have discussions, action on zoning ordinance only at the Planning Commission meetings. This is an evolved topic that I learned over the years. I couldn't even have subcommittees. Remember, we had subcommittees and we were told, no, don't do that. Everybody should have the same basis and the discussion should be taking place right here at the Planning Commission meeting. As I understand, it's not a conflict of interest, so no monetary, so I'm not addressing that. It's a matter of best practices. Planning Commission commissioners should be treated equally and have the same opportunity to discuss and decide on the zoning ordinance for the first time or multiple times, which turns out to be the case, in front of the public at a recognized Planning Commission meeting, not at a steering committee meeting. Topic 2, Planning Commissioners can do their own zoning ordinance proposal. Planning Commission can use the planning consultant or team can produce a proposed zoning ordinance report. We have done going through items individually here. That keeps the information here. The team would be composed of zoning professionals like a lawyer, the planning consultant, and involve people like zoning administrators. However, it would not have any planning commission commissioners, people up here, or elected officials on it. Because there is two process here in the Planning Commission and then go through Antrim County, who usually rubber stamps it then goes to the board. The board is elected officials. They have the final say anyways. Topic 3, use of the steering proposed ordinance report, which you received. And personally, I really like the format. It's clear, it's go through it. I'm talking format only, not necessarily the contents. I think, though, along with that, we should have what I call the working proposal report, working document, so I can trace for what was to what is without spending a lot of time going through that report. And you said there's 2 items in it that was in there that you disagreed with. I don't think anything in that type of proposal should come to the planning commission without just being a subject. Would you look into this? Or do you want to look into it? Not have any proposal coming to you other than rewrite. If it's a pure rewrite, no problem. But I still like to see what was eliminated, what went there, so I can make sure there's nothing new coming in, being in the audience, or if I was sitting up in your area. Deeply look for zoning changes. So I'm glad you mentioned zoning changes. I don't think there should be any in that type of proposal coming from a steering committee. If something is required, though, by a court case or law, and that's one thing we talked about when we had the interview with the company that Sarah works for. They said they looked at our proposal, there could be conflict. I think that's okay, but we should also know what was a court case, what was the law, because as we all know, law changes. It is not fixed. So we need to have it going back, if not for you, it's for people maybe a few years down here, what's going on. So we should have an explanation. This is what's changed for this reason because of XYZ court case. Any potential changes without zoning ordinance language should be presented to a planning commission, see if they want to proceed or not. Again, okay, maybe, wind turbines. Do we want to look into it? You recommend not to. That's something to do, not have the language and everything to go with it. Also, any changes that are proposed definitely should be on the current master plan, not a future one. That is our governing document, the current master plan. And so any changes proposed should be based on it. Maybe we shouldn't even have too much done other than a pure rewrite, because again, I like the format. If it's just a rewrite, no problem. I just want to make sure there's nothing in it that has been lost or dropped. I think we should have a working zoning ordinance report go along with the, proposed change. More to that details in my paper. Things like rewrite is okay. Legal concerns, maybe ZBA wants to change something. They can make proposals, but not, so we can trace from old to new and why. Not only for you, but for future groupings. I think this will result in a more efficient and effective review of what is proposed by the planning commission commissioners and the public. The review, you guys got to spend a lot of hours reviewing it, but really shouldn't. You should be able to take it, look at it before each meeting, have a good understanding, and then do the discussion. And then the working zoning ordinance report presentation. I personally think Sarah should, before I start a meeting on it, should give a presentation of what was changed in those areas to make it easier for the public and you to understand. And I will end it here. This ends, and like I said, this is just a concerned citizen giving his verbal report to you. Good luck. I know it's work, and I've been through it. And do not worry about spending a lot of time. It should be on any changes.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the audience?
Thank you.
It's been a while since I've been before you. I gave you a homework assignment. Excuse me, let me give my name first. Bob Spencer, 709 Northwest Torch Lake Drive. And I gave you a homework assignment that I told you next time I came and asked you for the answer. How did Key Wade in Michigan get its name? Was the question. And it was named after Chief Key Wade, wouldn't you know? Anyway, so I don't have a question tonight to leave you with. Just a couple of quick comments. Number one, I took a quick look through the almost 200-page document that culminates the work of the committee that Lee served on. I thought it was very professional, and I'm going to take a closer look at the content. I got a copy of it 2 days ago. And I'm just going to point something out. There's a former guy who used to sit over there, a guy who used to make agendas for board meetings. The question number 6 on the agenda says public comment on agenda items. What are these? Consideration of the agenda, conflict of interest statement, approval of minutes from a prior meeting, and public comment on agenda. As somebody who walks in off the street and doesn't know too much about what's going on, I have no idea what's on the agenda. So it's hard for me to formulate questions. Now, I happen to mention that to the supervisor, and he did give me the clue. I'm just saying, everybody's busy, nobody's busier than you guys when you work on this kind of stuff. Just trying to open your eyes to what I was feeling. Where do I start if I want to talk about agenda? Okay, thank you very much. No more questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Okay. So we move on to, oops, turn my button off. We move on to the ongoing reports. The only one that we would have the ability to do, I guess, Sarah, would be the zoning administrator's report.
Yeah, and I see that there's not one in your packet. I think Jackie was going to run those. She's not here tonight because she's sick.
Okay.
So we'll make sure to get you a copy of the permits and violations and things like that. Lately, it's been a lot quieter, just as far as permits and, applications and everything. So it's kind of calmed down in the zoning office after the summertime.
Okay. And we don't have a PC representative to the ZBA yet. We're going to address that a little bit later in the tonight.
Yeah, we do have a ZBA meeting next Wednesday night for a appeal of a zoning administrator's decision and interpretation.
Okay. And is there anything regarding the township board? We don't have Jason tonight, so,
I don't have anything to report for that.
okay. So moving on to the next item, correspondence. Is there a correspondence?
There, you did receive in the packet that was emailed to you, you received a letter from Jerry Kolka and Tom Joseph. And then on your desk tonight were a couple additional emails that came in after the packets went out. So one's from Paul Taylor, Lee Scott, and another one from Tom Joseph. Tom Joseph.
Okay, we're,
Yeah, the second one's on campgrounds. There's one that's stapled in the packet with your agenda that was dealing with breweries.
so in looking at these most recent emails, we heard from Lee earlier, so I see his email, and then we've got from Paul and from Tom. They look to be fairly specific, obviously on campgrounds, like you just said, and the other one had to do short-term residential.
Yeah, Paul's was about short-term rentals.
Okay, so I guess, first of all, from the, any commission members that have questions about these emails? Because I have a suggestion. The suggestion is that this is great to have this input, and I think we hold on to it. We have a lot of kind of broader strategic things to talk about first before specific aspects of the ordinance, in my view. And I think once we, oh, excuse me. Coming from my wife, that's quite a statement. So my point is that these are very good input here. I think we need to consider this as we're looking at those particular sections where they come up. And my point is that I think we have some broader strategic things to talk about before even getting into these. So my proposal is we put these aside, and once we get to those sections of the ordinance where that might come up, we address them. Okay? So with that, we can move into the main new business, in which is reviewing Articles 1, 3, 4, and 6 of the zoning ordinance, the draft zoning ordinance. So it's been a while since we've touched base on this, or since we met. We obviously have quite a lot to go through with this ordinance. And I would agree with the comments made that I know that the steering committee put a lot of effort into this, and it is a very professional document. It's worded nicely and very readable. I think there's some great stuff in there. But I do have some questions in general, and I personally, so I'm speaking for me, I'm not speaking for anybody on this commission, so I'm seeking your input. But my own perspective, it was hard to review when I looked at a particular section and then tried to compare, and I had so many questions right out of the gate as I was going through it. And I guess I was anticipating more of a red line type scenario when we looked at particular sections before, we could literally see what words were changed and we could say, okay, I see why that's changed. Oh, that makes sense. Or there was some clarity. And I realized in many instances that might not be practical. If you're shuffling things around a red line, it gets so convoluted you can't understand what you're looking at. So there's a balance here. And so as I was going through that, it led to a lot of questions, and then some concerns that I did not want. I wanted to make sure that this commission had and could benefit from discussions, the type of discussions that would have happened during the steering committee meeting. And just make sure that we are not shortchanging that discussion, because I think that's some of the most valuable aspects of this. So that's kind of one big, how do we make sure we get the type of process and we can truly understand what's being changed and for what reason, does it need to be changed now, and so forth. So that's one set of questions. And the other strategic issue or question is around, comes right out of the purpose. And let me get to that here. I apologize that I'm going to scroll down. When I read, this is just getting through the table of contents takes a long time. When I read the purpose, there's some questions in there about jurisdiction and so forth, but it says, in accordance with the authority and intent of Michigan Zoning and Animal Act and so on, which is essential to the well-being of the community, in which will place no undue burden upon developers, industry, and commercial. I had some concerns about kind of the ordering of things, which kind of set the whole tone for that. But the bottom line is when I was reading through that, it just occurred to me, it's like, well, this is supposed to be kind of the mechanism to manage the master plan. And yet we're getting ready to review the master plan. And so we're doing a very comprehensive, it is just a rewrite, I guess, pretty comprehensive overview here, but we haven't looked at the master plan in some time. So it seems almost, you could look at it almost backwards and say, are we doing this backwards? And, do we start with the master plan and then see what changes out of there and then go forward with the zoning ordinance change? So conceptually, that makes more logical sense to me. But I know we had some reasons why we wanted to look at this. So, and make some changes. So I think it would be good to spend some time discussing this. And I know we did in the past, but as we're getting into it and thinking about it, and this is the first time I've seen the draft, and then I start to realize the scope of the changes, then I start to think this is a bigger shift than what I anticipated. So I'll just pause there because I know I've dumped a lot on the table. So kind of two big things. I'm just looking for reaction from the committee. We'll start with the first one. Was it, when you were reviewing this, am I alone in this kind of feeling? as far as, be able to piece it.
No, I would concur with your thoughts. I read through it and what am I comparing it to, right? And being new to this reading, I was like, okay, this, for all I would know, this would be what was written. And that's what gospel is, but give me some reasons for that, because there's reasons why it came to this, right? But there might be a little more discussion down the road for that. So yeah, I would agree with you.
I couldn't agree with you more. When I first started, I kept thinking, but the master plan is supposed to, I kept wanting to get the coordination between the two, and I'm thinking, well, we're going to be doing the master plan. So I felt it was backwards. And I know we've had discussions, but it's still foggy to me, the process. And when I went through this, I thought, oh, I hope people don't get disturbed with me saying, okay, I need this explained. Can you give me a context? Can you tell me what this would look like? And because it's, yeah, I concur with what you're all saying. It was a bit of a struggle for me.
Barbara, you had some comments?
I didn't see any way to compare this to the existing zoning ordinance. I was really expecting to get a draft, but it would indicate what was changed and why. And I understood that the steering committee was only looking at two things. One was the format of the zoning ordinance and whether there was things misspelled or not in line with it should be, or it should be in a different section, things like that. And the other was how the law had changed with respect to any of those zoning ordinance articles. And I couldn't tell why anything was changed, looking just at the new draft. So I'm real uncomfortable with this and where we're at with it. And I also agree that I think that especially because this refers to the zoning, the planning master plan, refers to the master plan and how it's implementing the master plan and blah, blah, blah. But we've already talked about how we need to review the master plan because there may be some changes. And I know that the 2 years I've been on the planning commission, there's been a number of times where people have said, oh, well, I think various things. But one that I think of clearly is people saying, well, we need to talk about economic development, especially in our hamlets or our villages. Shouldn't we have more emphasis on trying to improve the business communities? Well, that's true. That's not in the master plan now. So don't we have to rewrite the master plan to do that? And then wouldn't the zoning ordinance follow that? So I just have a real problem with how this has been put together. It sounds beautiful. If I had never seen another zoning ordinance, if I wasn't trying to compare it to the existing one, I'd say, oh, this is beautiful. This looks great, sounds great, but I haven't got a clue how it compares to the existing zoning ordinance or how it implements our master plan, which we're not even sure we're comfortable with. So anyway, I agree with you.
Bill?
I think it was last November, I was asked to join the planning commission. And our first few meetings were going through sections of the zoning ordinance where we had those exact same comments. I understood why we're making modifications to those parts of the ordinance and the moratorium, and I think it helped us through, Sarah, for example, this summer with making it a little more clear for people coming with permits. But what we talked about then was, we're going to do this, and then we're going to go to the master plan. And I don't remember exactly what's in the meeting minutes, but I remember saying, we need to update the master plan to reflect now and what we want to be in the future, because that's changed a bit. That 180-degree change. And in my opinion, we need some specific plans for the hamlets that call things out with more clarity based on a lot of public input. And then in whatever it was, September, we met and defined this meeting. I wasn't able to articulate it the way you did. I'm like, wait, we're going to go back to the ordinance again? And then we're going to do the master plan. and I hope some specific plans, then we're going to go back to the ordinance again? I don't think unless you tell us differently, I don't think we have a need to edit the ordinance as much as we have a need to I shouldn't say edit, to update the ordinance as much as we have a need to update the master plan. And to save the community and you more time to go through this twice. And I get that it's going to take some time to modify and update the master plan. And I think it should come with a whole lot of community input. Because, for those who, yep, we want economic development, and we say, no, we don't, really.
Right.
We want things to be a lot more walkable. We don't want solar farm. Well, maybe we do, and to have that really out in a discussion instead of an opinion here or there. And that, to me, would make more sense to do perhaps maybe starting in May. So we get June, July, and August, for example, to have input. Remember 2 years ago, an awful lot of people were here for a couple of meetings because they were pretty interested in a particular agenda item. So I've got some edits. I didn't think as much about what it was and what it is now. I was just going through saying, I think it'd be a lot clearer for people to go through. But I'd support, if you're kind of suggesting, shelve this for a while, let's get back and focus on the master plan. And my hope is some specific plans for the hamlets, and then come back to this at a later date. You didn't ask for that idea, and I didn't make it a motion, but it felt like you were sort of doing that.
I wasn't trying to infer any particular action. I was just raising a concern of mine from the standpoint of reviewing, so I appreciate your comments.
You articulated it well. I mean, I thought that I hadn't put it that way.
Andy, I think that it would be very valuable to look at the places where the zoning ordinance needs to be changed because of a change in the law. Okay, so that we're not, 2 years, 3 years behind based on that. But other than that, we can live with what we've got until we do the master plan first and find out from the citizens, what is it do you want? Is it still the same as it was 5 years ago? Or are we talking about different things now? So my suggestion would be to review where this was revised to reflect the current state of the law, and then maybe deal with those things, and then let the rest of it go until we've reviewed the master plan.
Okay, thank you for those thoughts. Let's hear from the left side of the table over here.
Sure, okay. First off, I'd like to just say that I really appreciate what the steering committee would do and what they have done, because it takes a lot of time, and I in no way want anyone to ever feel that I was, not appreciative of what they do. Barbara, I think you probably said it best, and along with Bill, to go over with the master plan. My question is, when individuals come before to serve to gather information on this master plan, were there a lot of individuals that did that when this came to be, or?
That was back in 2018, I believe, and there was a very detailed survey that went out to everybody, and they responded. I think it was a significant amount of people responded to it, and that's kind of what led to the master plan as it exists now. Well, in that 5 years, a lot of things could have changed.
Right,
And so if we're going to review it, which we have to review it every 5 years.
right.
And so if we're going to review it, and if in fact people's attitudes have changed, then they should be reflected in the master plan. So and then our zoning ordinance should work to implement that master plan, the new one.
Right. I would be in agreement to push it, shelve it right now. And like you said, I think we're in good hands right now where we sit with it to think more on this master plan, other than the focus on this.
Okay, thanks for your thoughts. And Laura, you were on the steering committee, correct?
Yes. So I agree, and that it would be helpful to have, and I think we talked about this, calling out, how each individual thing is different or the same. I don't even have to worry about how this is different. Maybe it's worded different, better perhaps, like in a lot of places. And the formatting, it's just so much easier to read. it would be helpful to have that called out, how things are the same, how they're different, how they're new, maybe it's a completely new topic that we've added in. That would be helpful. But as far as like, just to give you an idea of what I did when I went through it the first time, it was just reading through it and what are my thoughts, just noting down what are my thoughts, whether it was new or the same or whatever, noting those out, and then we had a discussion on it. And there were a lot of things that were noted, like PC, and it was a joke. Eventually, like, oh yeah, we're going to be talking about that. And there was a lot. So it's not that we didn't expect anybody to want to talk about those things. We knew that we should. So I think that there's a lot in there, and there are some things that we do need to address, like the signs thing. We need to address that. Definitely need to do that. And as far as the master plan, I think that we also need to do that. We agreed on that, and we need to get started on it. I don't think we've hired anybody for it. I don't know, did we get the budget for it? But that's going to be a long process. What are we going to do in the meantime?
We did budget for it, right?
Yeah, that was my understanding.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
That was my understanding. that we
think I remember-
budgeted For it.
I don't know if it was in the spring, at
Yeah,
least I
budgets
sent to
are in the
maybe Andy and you.
springtime.
Is that,
The budget's in the springtime. I don't know in the end how it came out for it, because it gets approved to start in April is when the budget year starts.
Yeah,
So-
I'm not used to, asking for something on a budget and
Yeah.
it's just automatically approved, so.
Yeah. I'd have to go back.
On the master plan, I would comment on that because I was sure when it came about. So I can give the history, but I'm not qualified now.
Please hold that for a second. So, and I just want to kind of summarize what I'm hearing here and then kind of rephrase a few things or reemphasize a few things. So I want to reinforce that my review of this, I really like. It's tempting to just say, oh, this is cool, let's just go on. But when I think about that, I don't even have, to your comments, Laura, about kind of going through it and making comments as we go, I struggled with that because I had so many questions right out of the gate, I couldn't even process. And so it was like, I can't, we have to stop because this isn't making sense because I have no context to evaluate, even though it looks good and reads well and all those things, I don't have any context to evaluate whether or not it makes sense for this community or not. If I were a betting person, I'd probably say, yeah, probably. But I don't want to just make a bet on it. I want to know it. I want to feel good about it. I want to be able to embrace it. I want to take it back to the community. I want to be able to own it as part of this commission. And so that when people are asking about it, we all feel part of it and don't really feel that way, or it's going to be very hard to make that connection. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it'd be very difficult. And especially without having the kind of the Polaris, the North Star of the master plan to look at. And without that, it's it may be a great ship to head in that direction, but we don't even know how rough the seas are going to be. So we might be, maybe a submarine's the best thing to use. So I don't know. Anyway, I know I'm dumping a lot here, and I know this is challenging because we had this process set up and we were going to move forward, but after getting into it and seeing where we were, I just really caused a lot of pause. So, I guess maybe Sarah, I would ask, can you reframe for all of us what led to the feeling of going through? I know there's some law things and there, some legal things that said, hey, we need to take a look at some items. So can you give us kind of an overview again of why we got to this point and what led to the steering committee and all of that, and then to this point?
Yeah. So that is a big component was the change in law, either case law or legislature law through the state that needed to be updated in the zoning ordinance. And to clear some things up, there were conflicting regulations. This ordinance is the first ordinance that ever was adopted by the township and has just been amended over the years. So there's lots of amendments. And a lot of times when you do that, you end up plugging something in one spot and not seeing how it goes through the whole ordinance. So that was something that I noticed when we were interviewing, like Jerry said, to be the planning consultant for the township. We were reading the ordinance and going, well, that doesn't work. This doesn't make sense, kind of, circling it and highlighting it, just as, the process. So, that was one of the reasons when I started working as a planning consultant, the planning commission was going through section by section. They were in Article 2 and had been there for quite a few months, and quite a few months after I started working through section by section. And I believe that's when, the supervisor came to me and was saying, this is really slow. Is there something else we can do? Is there another process? We don't want to burn the planning commission out. What can we do? And I said, well, we can just kind of do it all at one time and bring it back and look at it. So the intent with this update was to update for legal reasons, new format, streamline, take out some of the language that doesn't make sense, make it easier to read through that process. So in doing that, the township board established a steering committee to help review the first draft for the planning commission. And so that's what happened. I wrote the sections. I started with kind of our format that we go through for the sections, and then looked at the existing ordinance, pulled over the text that's good, pulled over the policy. So there may be different words, but it's the same policy that the township already has. Did make some changes. I'm not going to say there's no changes in here, that there's not changes to the policy, because there are. Because some things, might make a little bit more sense. Some things are new ideas. But like the steering committee said, it's like, well, we kind of like that, or we kind of don't, but let the planning commission talk about it. And, I'm here to help facilitate it and get through it. So, whatever you want as far as putting it in there or taking it out, not taking it personal. You're telling me I'm working for you to get through this. Something I would say about it is and I know there's been a lot of talk about, well, what's changed? What's a red line? If you looked at a red line, the whole thing would be redlined because the words are all different. So the only thing I can do, and what I did with the steering committee, is here's the sections, they read through them, and then we kind of walked through, and I'd go, okay, this is what the section means. Here's where you can find it in your other ordinance. Here's what's changed, or didn't really change. So I'd encourage you to focus on the policy, and if the policy makes sense, and when I say policy, I mean, do the accessory buildings, when you read that, does the section make sense? Do you think that that's how it should be regulated? Is it based on the master plan? And to ask those questions when we're going through the sections, to say, this doesn't make sense. Why is this in here? And I'll probably say, because that's what your current ordinance says. So we carried it forward. No, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It works. It may not make a lot of sense. I don't know why we wrote that in that way before. But, I can kind of walk through that with you. I don't have a document that's a 1-for-1, because it's really hard to put something together that's a 1-for-1 to explain to you where everything is. But I know it's a struggle. Every planning commission struggles with it when they review a zoning ordinance. So I deal with this with, the last 6 of them that I've handed out through the process. But I do want to let you know that, the steering committee, they did review it. They spent time with it, edited it for me, kind of were, the first draft of it, cleaned it up a little bit for you. So then the planning commission, you can take your time with it and review it and have these deeper conversations. The steering committee didn't want to get too far down into the weeds on anything. If the planning commission wants to do that, I encourage you to. There are sections that need to get fixed before we work on a master plan. Like the sign section, that case law was from 2015.
So
It's
I've got an-
2023,
I've got an idea. What I heard was context. And I don't really want to see a red line of every change that was made because it's such a different document. But yeah, I don't know if the steering committee had, but something that would give me context would be some kind of a presentation. And I don't mean a 3-hour long presentation, but maybe a half-hour presentation that says something like, I want to tell you about the 3 main things we did. This is instead of going section by section, because it wouldn't really give me context. I would be editing. We'd be editing by committee. You said because of law changes. What are those? because this law changed, here's 3 sections that we focused on some changes to. You talked about, we had some conflicting sections, and we recognized that last fall when we did it. We had, which sections were conflicting, and what about it did we change? And then new, because time has passed and there's some new things. Something that says in the entirety of the work the steering committee did, here's the 8 things y'all ought to know, and then the planning commission go to work. And I don't know if that's a PowerPoint, but just something that gives us a summary from the beginning to end. It's a thicker document. I do like it. But I think what you're hearing is I kind of lack the context to really be able to go through it unless you just want us to wordsmith, as opposed to understanding the entirety of the context of all the changes. And I don't think it'd be a big presentation, but that would give me a more clarity to say, okay, now I understand some of the sections I will pay more attention to more than others that are just maybe standard, for example.
Yeah.
And now I understand Mr. Kulka's email more with because when I read through it, I'm like, okay, is that just advice? Is that based on something that happened? But he's saying, okay, steering committee did a bunch of work. Great for us. We've got a draft. We're trying to figure out how we went from, current to draft new.
Yeah, and I would just say this first section of the ordinance is the meatiest, probably the hardest, will take you the most time to get through, because it's all the zoning districts with all the uses and all the supplemental standards with them. It's a heavy lift, this part is, versus, the administration and ZBA section, the process, the administrative chapters, which come along a little bit later as well.
Could I add?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Mo.
So I don't know if you guys know this, but we're like being recorded right now.
We're doing what now?
We're being recorded, and we were recorded too. So I don't know anybody that likes to sit and watch those recordings, but those are out there. And throwing that out there as far as, that history is there, if it would be helpful for anyone.
You need to see the meetings that the.
Yeah.
Yes, during
To see the
committee
meetings the
meetings.
steering committee had, so we can get
Yeah.
the context that way.
I watched every one of those that was on YouTube, and I also went back and printed out a copy of all your minutes. And the last YouTube had 2 different dates. It said it was on July something and July something, but it was the same meeting,
Oh,
exactly the same. So I don't know if there's one missing or what that happened with that. And then there was none for the last meeting
okay. So we
of the
should
steering
probably-
committee. So it was difficult because I really also did not feel like I was getting a lot of the substance of the discussions, especially when you read the minutes, you don't get any substance. I mean, you get the bottom line kind of, but the substance of the discussions, I didn't really feel like I got that from any of it.
Yeah, I don't think we reviewed them in the same order.
Mm-mm.
Like I remember us
Right.
doing the administrative stuff first, so you'd probably have to read that section and then listen to it
Okay.
and follow along.
Well, I didn't find it particularly useful, I guess is what I'm saying. Sorry.
That's okay.
So some good thoughts, and kind of piggybacking a little bit on what Bill had just described as a possibility. So, or as a potential approach here. But I guess before even getting into that, because coming up with an approach to review suggests that we're going to review. There's still the question: do we put it aside, or just go touch on certain sections that we need to from a legal perspective, perhaps, or the sign issue. I guess I struggle with that too, because part of me, I feel like, if we went through this, let's assume for a moment we found some kind of process, we could go through this and we could get comfortable with it and say, you know what, we do feel good about this. Or if that's not this, I guess it's the new one. Assuming if you make that assumption, then you'd say, okay, but now we're going to go back and look at the master plan. And I'd think, okay, there's some things I could envision in the master plan that might come out different. And it's possible that we might come back and make some changes to the ordinance based on the changes in the master plan. But I have a hard time believing that that would be completely thrown out. It would be certain pieces of it or certain additions, certain areas of clarification. So when I think of it that way, and again, I don't know what I'm right on this, but when I think of it intuitively, it just makes sense that we could proceed with this being very cautious in certain spots, knowing that we need to do some work on the master plan, but get, 80% of it done, if not more, and then get our master plan work done and then come back and see what needs to be reflected. And then we know, so that's a suggestion to think about. What's the reaction to that?
So are you suggesting go through it, and if we get to a section that says, you know what, this one feels like it's really connected to what the master plan either says or might say, and we put an asterisk on that and come back to it at fine as is, or use current ordinance and come back after we go through a master plan process? Because there's a lot of things that are going to be just in there because they need to be in there to be consistent with the state. There's some other things in there might be about the other committees in the township and less related to land use or a master plan going forward. Is that what you're proposing or suggesting?
Effectively, yeah.
Okay.
And I guess just, and I wasn't even that specific. It was more like we go through it. We know we got this issue of the master plan rewrite, but we go through it. My sense is that a lot of it probably wouldn't change as a result of a change to the master plan. And we could make good progress on that because there's a lot of work to do. So that's one approach. And whether or not people would feel comfortable with that. Alternatively, we do have to address some things in here from a legal and sign stuff. We do that and then do that more quickly and then come back to the master plan and then come back with the full rewrite with the context of the master plan. So it's kind of two options that I'm looking at.
And you are going to come back to the zoning ordinance after the master plan. I don't know if we've said that before. Like once you get done doing the master plan, you automatically come back to the zoning ordinance. So if we go through and adopt this as is today, we're going to do the master plan. I'm going to be like, hi guys, back with the zoning ordinance. We had some changes to make. So you're not going to get away from that part of it.
Yeah, the
regardless.
master plan is the strategy.
Mhm.
The ordinance is the tactics to implement the strategy. So we're talking about editing the tactics when we know we're going to change the strategy. That's what feels odd.
And I think that is a good point to note too. I mean, if we're going along and you're going, hey, maybe we need to come back to this, kind of like when we were talking about the village district and some of those changes, there were more changes the planning commission talked about making, but they're like, I don't think we have the basis in the master plan to do that. So let's come back and talk about adding some more stuff in after we go back to the master plan. So I think that's valid as you're working through here and you go, this is too big of a change from what we have in our current zoning ordinance, or is this supported by our master plan, and say, okay, no, let's not do this now. Let's come back to it.
So what you just said just puts me even farther over on the spectrum of
Sorry, I'm trying
parking
to
this.
help
No,
make
no,
it worse.
no, it's good. It puts me farther on the spectrum of pushing this off until we do the master plan. At least the majority of it, and to just address the very specific issues in the short term, to give us a Band-Aid until we, get the master plan done, and then we come back with the full enchilada to deal with. Because we're going to have to do that anyway, I think you just said.
Right. It's either going to be a couple of changes or minor changes if you go through and adopt this potentially. Well, I don't know, because I don't know what the master plan is going to look like. There could be some major changes, but you'd have the formatting already done before you went into trying to change it again after the master plan.
Well, this is going to be an interesting one to come up with a motion. So, Sarah, can you give us a little bit better sense of what if we would just say, okay, let's just focus on the areas that absolutely need to get done in the short term. You listed them out a little bit shorter, but what is your sense with your experience working with these other 6 townships that you have in the past and so forth? What kind of a process does that look like? And how urgent are those matters?
From the existing ordinance, the ones that
Yes.
we need
So
to change.
if we were to keep the existing ordinance and just focus on those things we absolutely need to get done and reasonably quickly, what would that look like?
Well, I guess it would depend. It would be a zoning ordinance amendment. So we know that process, right? The planning commission reviews the language, holds a public hearing, goes to the county, goes to the township board, becomes effective. So kind of best case scenario, you're 4 to 6 months on a zoning amendment. Being that we're going to have multiple sections, it's either going to bog it down. You might get one part that bogs down everything else, so we can pull out part of it. It's hard to say exactly because I can't. The sign section, I think, would be like an easy chunk. You just say, okay, the sign article, we're readopting a whole new sign article, kind of like we did with nonconformities. It might have been just before a lot of them, the newer members, but that nonconforming article we adopted all, brand new at one time. So we could do that with signs. Signs probably one of the biggest liabilities in the current ordinance. And then some of the other sections we may be able to group together. So you'd kind of have, I'd probably prefer to do it kind of like on a rolling, have 1 or 2 amendments that you've done, you've reviewed, maybe move those to public hearing as you're starting a different section. So we may have a couple of meetings where we just are working through different amendments instead of you putting them all on one agenda with one public hearing, because there could be items that the public, well, the planning commission or the public is very passionate about and can consume a lot of time, and other parts kind of get just glossed over. So I think I'd rather try to do some groupings and do a couple different groupings to do that. The best that we can. I don't know. I can't tell you like, oh, this section, and this section right off the top of my head. But we could work through that.
To take that to a practical example, let's take the signs, for example, that section. If we were to take and just say, okay, let's address that. Would we, in doing that, would the work that the steering committee did in their, would that work be able to be used in the current and basically shoved into the current ordinance and just plug it in and that part's done?
Right. I mean, you'd already have it. So the steering committee didn't talk about signs too much. They're like, planning commission can talk about that.
Okay.
We don't want to get into
But
it.
you have some draft language in here.
There is draft
Right.
language in here, right? But it would be something that we'd be able to carry forward when you came back and wanted to work through a whole new ordinance update. I'd have to go back and make sure all of the words and definitions and things line up, because when you're just cutting and pasting from one to the other, I've had trouble with that too in definitions. So it can be done. It may look a little bit different from that perspective, because might have to change some of the words so that it works with what we have right now.
Okay, so that's signs. Okay, then pick the next. Signs kind of urgent, very succinct portion. What's the next big one? Let's think practically, what would that look like maybe?
Yeah, and I'd have to go through the ordinance and look at the different sections that you should deal with. For all of them, like where they conflict, the different sections conflict between the regulations. So I can't give you a list right now.
Okay, so I'm going to try and propose something here, just for consideration for everybody to think through. So what if we were to say, let's get very specific, let's focus on signs. Ask Sarah to go back, propose modifications to address issues with the sign section of the ordinance. And at the same time, she could take a stance and kind of prioritize the next pieces that we'd want to look at to address kind of holes that we feel that are in the current ordinance. We start working through that process. And I think that'll tell us 2 things. One is we'll start making progress on it. But 2, and there's a bigger question. In parallel, can we, start laying out what this process looks like for the master plan? Because if we would have budget and we could start that planning process in April, we can then maybe even do some pre-work getting ready for that. Kind of plug holes, keep the ship floating, get the master plan going, and then bring the 2 back together at some point down the road. And still make advancements in this, and so we don't leave ourselves exposed if we have issues here, but not just go forward with a full-fledged rewrite right now. First of all, does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
makes sense, right?
for something of note, the lack of time, and I'm only going to say this from experience, per Mr. Scott's recommendation, I'm in favor of deleting 625 and 627 because I'm not in favor of any wind farms or solar farms here. Just going to get that out there so everybody knows it.
Noted.
I've been on the bad side of that before, and it's not, this is not, yeah.
Darn, I was hoping to open one up on my property, but, so does the other aspect of what I was mentioning make sense, though?
It does.
From a process perspective?
Yes.
Makes sense.
I'm ready to go to work. With what you described, I think makes a lot of sense. Take some sections and have more work done. But there's some things in here that we can go through and get in our wake because they're pretty easy to go through. And I do think there are some sections in here that we're going to say, you know what, I'm going to put that on hook. I might talk about it in some edits, but it'll be edited again. Some of the sections I think could be edited significantly after it updated the master plan. But that might only be 15% of this document.
Okay, so this is what we're going to do. But we're going to form this, somebody's going to form this into a motion here in a moment, but I'm going to paraphrase it again. We're going to, Sarah, we're going to ask you to come back and whenever our next meeting is that we want to tackle this, we're going to tackle the sign issue. And then we're going to ask you to prepare us for that, to address that issue. We're also going to ask you to develop kind of a prioritized list, not of everything that needs to be done in the document, but maybe the next 2 or 3 things. Let's take this in bite-sized chunks. The next 2 or 3 things that are of next highest priority right underneath the signs. And then we are going to start tackling those one after another. And with each meeting that we have set up to go through this, we're going to address those things in this ordinance. And we're also going to address getting a process started for a master plan revision. We're going to go in parallel. We're going to impress ourselves with this. Can you play that back and see what, because I can't remember what I said.
You know, I mean, if you want to make if somebody wants to make a formal motion, they can. I think that if everybody's comfortable and understands with what you say, I'm fine with that direction too, without a motion. It's whatever you want though. If you want to say, hey, we're going to hit pause on this complete draft, right? But we're going to work through some pressing matters and amendment wise, and we're also going to start our master plan process. So we're going to be busy planning.
That's what this is about, isn't it?
It's in the name.
So it's
So
up to you if you want to do that in the form of a motion.
I'm
or
okay
not.
without a motion as long as we've got that captured like what you just said.
Yeah,
And is
I
there any
understand.
reason that we need to have a motion and formalize that? Is this,
Only if there's disagreement amongst the
Yes.
planning commission that you can't figure out,
so
get
I'm
a
going to go
majority.
through each one, just a nod is basically, I just want to make sure everybody understands. And if there's any questions, please ask. Laura, you
I
go.
understand, I'm disappointed, but I understand, and I'm up for fixing the stuff that needs to be fixed, for sure.
I agree. I'd add one thing. I think if we're going to have multiple meetings to go through the zoning ordinance and start to talk about master plan, I think we had a schedule. And so the community knows what that schedule is. So they know if there are certain meetings that they want to plug into or not. I work best on a schedule, knowing when we might start folding in a master plan. You mentioned a budget that starts in April. I mean, those kinds of things in a schedule, and we know when we can start to get into meat and details. I would think we'd want to, in March, start making the community aware. Hey, in May, June, July, whatever, we're going to have some public meetings about it. I'd rather be in front of that communication throughout the township than not being in front of it, because I don't think then we'll get the input that we want. So I think a schedule will help us, but I think it'll probably help the people in the township a lot more to know what we're doing and when, and let them know. Meanwhile, we have a zoning ordinance that's just fine. We don't have a moratorium this time on anything. We're doing some work for the future. And I think having that information, more folks in the township aware of that will be helpful.
Okay, so I think we have a game plan. Sarah, I think I will hand out this one that I had prepared for everybody because, so everyone, let's take a copy of this. This is something that copy of this.
Oh, I didn't keep a copy.
Oh,
I
sorry.
made extras.
Okay. And we want to make sure we make this available publicly as well.
Thank you.
Please hand Bill one. This, so I like the plan where we are as far as moving ahead. What I did here, this was just assuming, if there's changes that are going to be made that can be redlined, and you can obviously see it, then that's pretty straightforward, other than the aspect of context. But for sections, if we are looking at something and there's enough wording, even within a portion, what this table that I was suggesting that we could look at is just would allow us to look at a certain article number, sections in the current ordinance that it pertains to, so you could at least get to it quickly. A summary of the changes, just Sarah's kind of high level, this is why we're changing them. Key points within that and the reasons why we need to do it. And maybe any additional context, like we need to change it because the law has changed and there's recent case law and something like that, just to capture that so we have it at our disposal. Kind of something that helps us walk through different pieces. If we're just doing just the sign area, it may not be relevant. We might be able to go without it, but in case for the future, it was just something I was thinking about too. So. So other than just highlighting that, I think we've finished our new business for the day. Unless there's any other questions from the commission on that section. With that, we'll move on to unfinished business. This is the ZBA appointment. So this is a planning commission representative on the ZBA. So last time, Sarah, we had spoken of this and there was not anybody that would volunteer, could do this. I understand it. So I'm not saying that in a negative way at all. I totally get it. But where does that leave us?
Yeah, so we need to have, state law requires that a planning commission member sit on the zoning board of appeals to have that connection between the two boards. So the planning commission needs to appoint someone from their membership to take that role. Jason is not eligible because he is a township board member. Everybody else, though, is fair game for a ZBA meeting. So I don't know if anybody has, would like
I
to
think I'm
volunteer,
off the
be a part
hook
of
because
it.
my wife's on the ZBA.
So we do have a case next week, so I need somebody from the planning commission to show up next week. Their meetings are the third Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's their regular scheduled meetings. So if you have that night available on your calendars on a regular basis, that'd be a good place to start.
So since we last met, is there anybody that'd be willing to volunteer to do this?
Well, we'd mentioned before, and I would do that if you so feel. Don't everybody clap at once.
No, you did. No, I appreciate it. No, we would appreciate that.
No, I will gladly serve if you elect me to that.
That would be terrific. And there is, what is the process for getting that done? Is it just
You
him?
just make a motion to appoint Kevin to be the ZBA rep.
Okay, so can we have that motion from someone?
Make a motion that Kevin Woolgard be the rep to the ZBA for the planning commission.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so thank you, Kevin. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you,
We
Kevin.
very much
I'll
appreciate it.
send you the packet for next week.
Where is he? We'll find him.
So now the next section of the agenda is concerns of the commission. From the chair, again, Laura, your comments, I understand the disappointment. I do. You put a lot of work into that, and I struggle with all of this, so I've spent more time thinking about it than I care to admit. But I think we will come back to this body of work and we will use it. So it's just a matter of exactly the timing for that. I don't have any other concerns. Any concerns by the planning commission members? Sarah?
Our next meeting's December 13th. That's our regularly scheduled meeting. And so I'll bring back signs for you and I'll figure out some more information on the master plan. If we can get started right away or if we need to wait until next budget year, all that good stuff for you.
Do you work for free?
No.
Probably wait.
In having that next meeting in December, do you feel that would be enough time for you to prepare so that we could start looking? So one item on the agenda would be the sign
Right.
section, and then we can discuss the next ones. I just focus on the signs and then
Yeah.
discussion of the next ones, and then start our planning process for the
Right.
master plan.
Yeah, I
That'd
think
be a
so.
meaty agenda.
And everybody is able to attend that meeting. I know sometimes at the end of the year you get into, no, 7 p.m.
On the
13th.
13th?
The 13th, December 13th. No?
No,
I-
not me.
Okay.
I'd be out of town for that whole week.
I don't know, Barbara, are you okay?
No, I think
Okay.
I'm fine. I'm just disappointed that I can't be here.
Okay.
Do we want to start, these meetings, do we want to start them earlier or anything, as long as we're dealing with these issues so that it doesn't get to be a 10:30, 11 o'clock meeting?
I'm open to that. If the planning commission is, I don't know what everybody's schedule is.
Is a 6
6
o'clock
okay.
start? Good. Laura, is it harder?
Yeah,
Is it? Okay.
I'll make it work.
Is 6:30 better than 6?
The later the
The
better.
later the better, okay. Okay. How about others?
I'm fine.
How about we compromise and do the 6:30?
Okay.
Because later is a little bit better for me too in general.
Okay. So we'll do the December meeting at 6:30, and then in January, you're going to be setting your calendar for the next year, for 2023. So we can talk about that some more then. I know that's only one meeting. I mean, I guess this one was at 6, that one's at 6:30. See how that feels.
Sounds good. I guess that's moving on to the next piece is public comment. So again, if there's any people in the public that would make some comments, I guess you've already filled out a card, they can just come forward. So
I wanted to, is this on?
yes.
I wanted to comment on your interest in getting public input for the process, which is very important. You have a huge obstacle to overcome. I realize this is not summertime, but this should be filled with people when your agenda said you're going to discuss the zoning ordinance in its entirety. And most of the people that I see, I don't come to every meeting, but most of the people I've seen here before. So there's always a small group that is interested in the well-being of the township. The bulk of the residents are apathetic. And I was chair of the planning commission for 5 years, of my 6 years on the commission. And I recall one stretch of 6 public hearings where nobody showed up. And they're all posted and everything. So anyway, what I'm getting at is, Barbara, you mentioned a public opinion survey back in 2018.
Right.
I've been a permanent resident up here year-round since 2005.
You don't remember seeing it?
I never got that survey. And I would be interested in knowing some of the people that I know were living here at that time, who were here then, if they got it. So, but I would, even if you depend on in-person meetings and you wait until the spring or summer when more people are around, you get fairly decent attendance, I would still recommend you give consideration to mailing out a survey, because people will respond to a written survey much more than coming.
Sure, sure.
So, anyway, I just think that if you could give that some consideration, I think it would be well received.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you know, do we have good database of full-time, part-time residents, both second mailing addresses, email address?
Probably not. I don't know if the treasurer does like a special handling for the winter taxes or not. Some townships do. Or if there's any emails. I know in the zoning side, our side of it, we don't keep emails or phone numbers or anything like that.
I'm just
and
wondering who in the
assessing doesn't.
township might know if we have, I was here in 2018, I didn't get a survey. So
Usually
I'm
we
just
would-
wondering, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm wondering if we have good contact information for all
Right.
full year and part year residents, because that is,
Right.
his suggestion is a good one, whether it's mail or email or both, to get, and also have in person, but
Mm-hmm.
we can capture a lot more and get more done in some months where there's not as many people around or it's too cold to go out.
Yeah. We usually suggest sending out a postcard, and I like to send it to the property address and to the owner's address. Because if you send it to the property, sometimes you can pick up a renter versus the owner. And then the owner, if they don't live at the property, or if it's off season, or they don't fail to forward their mail or something like that. So it takes a little bit of time, but you can go, pull them both and go through and see which ones are different and send them out. That's what I like to do. Not all townships do that. They just say send to the property owner or send to the property address. But that's a discussion that we can have and would be dependent on the budget. But usually a postcard that says, hey, we have a survey. Use this link to take it online. If you need a paper copy, stop into the office or let us know. We'll mail you one. You can mail it back. And I've had a lot of good luck with that because people see the postcard and they usually respond right away. And then sometimes you can have different organizations, like your lake associations, or push it out to their memberships too, if they're willing to. I know that's down in Milton. That was one of the things that happened there. They had a couple of associations that sent it out to their membership by email, and so put it on the township website.
Yeah, we've got that newsletter that goes out. I don't remember if the last one had constant contact in there,
Yeah.
but I'm sure the next one will. That'll
Yeah.
be once we get that built.
Right. And it's a newsletter, and it goes out a couple times a month because there's the supervisor does a constant, a newsletter, and then there's just a general one, and there's usually one about meeting dates. And so on the township website, you can click to sign up to enter your email, or you can reach out to Virginia through email, and she'll put your email address on it. And so you'll get that, and we'd push it out through that as well.
Is there any other public comments? Jerry?
Just want to say, everybody here, I really love the dynamics that's going on, because no one expressed an interest, oh, well, or drift away. You want it to be involved, you want it to ask questions, and you want to make good decisions on it. That is very key. Also, I want to say to Andy that was, when I was getting the chair, the least paid job I've ever had per hour. Being a commissioner, and it worked out, the pay went up a little bit, but the amount of hours you had to put in, one means you get paid for it, other activities, but it was rewarding, it was good. And you didn't need to say, hey, things in other areas, what we're saying is you're the key. This is the area for the public hearings, which is very key. You got involved there, but, it doesn't show up. People show up, generally have questions, they want to see some kind of product coming out of the purpose. So, good job. The other thing I say, sorry I interrupted you about the history of the master plan, but that was one of my first major assignments as the chair of the planning commission. Young thing to me says, okay, work on the master plan. Okay, work on the master plan because that is the planning commission duty. And so I worked closely with Priscilla at that time on it. So we have variety. We have to bring the people. Yeah, we did a survey, but we also started it, through the summer, because that's when we have so many of our citizens go to Arizona, where it is. I used to take off, but I've been full-time resident. They're not talking to me right now, so. So I think that's very important. The master plan, though, surveys are important, but we had a variety of meetings. We had an evening meeting, we had a daytime meeting, we even had a weekend meeting.
and I attended them all, and tried to bring the people involved. We sent out surveys, and then there was a draft product that came back to the commissioners. We went through them, trying to find out. Some did more. Some commissioners had a lot more questions on the maps, questions on this. But that became the document that was used. Is it perfect? No, I don't think anyone's come out as perfect, but it reflects your community. And that's why I think your comment of saying, let's do the master plan, because that reflects the community. The only one we have now is the current one. And if we say we want this new thing, well, how does it go to the master plan? So the driving vehicle is the master plan. In fact, if you talk to the consultant, even Sarah there, if you go to a court, somebody appeals anything, the judge can say, let's see the master plan. Where is it in it? I don't know if you knew that, but that is a key principle. And from a law standpoint, there's so much about that I learned, sometimes the hard way, but it's very important to learn it and to know it. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Okay. Have a good day.
So thank you. Any other public comments? Hearing none, I think we can move towards adjournment. I appreciate the patience this evening. It's kind of an amorphous topic, a tough one, but it's a good one and a very important one, obviously. So appreciate that. So with that, and there's any other parting comments or?
I'll second that.
We have a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I have a question for you.